My uncle promised me his vintage car, but sold it for scrap, so I tracked it down and restored it, then drove it to his funeral. A plan that formed in the hollowed-out space where my grief and my fury met. The news of his passing had come as a shock, a sudden phone call that left me reeling, not just from the loss of him, but from the loss of what I thought we had, a bond forged in grease and gasoline and summer sun. My first thought, a guilty and childish one, was of the car, the beautiful, gleaming 1967 Chevrolet Impala that had been the centerpiece of our relationship for my entire life. I could still hear his voice, rough and warm, saying, "This old girl will be yours one day, kid. You're the only one who loves her right." That promise was the foundation of our connection, a sacred vow between a man who had no children of his own and a nephew who idolized him. And I fully intended to honor his memory by caring for his greatest treasure. In the bleak days following the funeral, as the family gathered at his house to sort through his affairs, I finally mustered the courage to ask my aunt about the Impala's paperwork, my voice casual, pretending I was just helping to tidy up loose ends. Her face, already pinched with the stress of executor duties, crumpled into a mask of pity and discomfort, and she could barely meet my eyes as she told me. She explained in halting sentences that about a month before he died, my uncle had suddenly decided he needed the space in his garage and, declaring the car a waste of good sentiment, had called a scrapyard to come and take it away. She said he sold it for a few $100s, a pittance for a classic car, and that he had been almost coldly practical about the whole affair, showing no emotion as it was winched onto the flatbed truck. The news felt like a physical blow, a sucker punch to the soul that left me breathless and staggering under the weight of a betrayal that reached beyond the grave. The man I thought I knew, the one who taught me about camshafts and carburetors, who spoke of that car with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, would never have done such a thing. I stumbled out of the house into the bright, uncaring sunlight, my vision blurring with a toxic mix of unshed tears and white-hot rage, the memory of every greasy handshake and every shared laugh now feeling like a lie. That promise wasn't just about metal and glass. It was a symbol of his approval, a tangible representation that he saw something in me he valued, that I was worthy of his legacy. His cruel final act felt like a message, a last judgment from beyond, declaring that I, with my sentimental attachment, was never pragmatic enough, never hard enough to truly deserve anything of his. The grief for my uncle curdled instantly into something else entirely, a cold, single-minded determination to reclaim what was mine, not because he willed it, but because I did. My first move was to retreat to his now silent garage, a place that still smelled of oil and old memories, and I began a frantic, desperate search through every filing cabinet, every dusty box, every drawer filled with decades of accumulated paperwork. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, a receipt, a bill of sale, a name scribbled on a napkin, any clue that could lead me to the junkyard that had taken my future away. After hours of fruitless searching, my fingers black with grime and my hope dwindling, I found it, an old insurance folder tucked behind a stack of workshop manuals, and paper clipped to the outdated policy was a crumpled receipt from Henderson Salvage and Scrap. The name and address were printed in smudged ink, a location on the industrial outskirts of the city I'd never heard of. And holding that slip of paper felt like holding a winning lottery ticket written in betrayal. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight there, my heart hammering against my ribs with a frantic rhythm of dread and a fragile burning hope. Henderson Salvage was a bleak post-apocalyptic landscape of twisted metal and forgotten dreams, acres of crumbling cars piled high like metallic braves under a gray sky. The air smelled of rust, ozone, and decay, and the screech of heavy machinery grinding metal was a constant deafening assault on the senses. I found the foreman, a large man in oil-stained coveralls named Ray, and I showed him the receipt, my voice barely steady as I explained why I was there, the story tumbling out of me in a rushed, emotional plea. He listened, his expression unreadable, and then he simply nodded and led me on a solemn walk through the labyrinth of scrap, deeper and deeper into the heart of the yard until he stopped and pointed a thick finger. And there she was. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million pieces. The Impala was unrecognizable, a corpse among corpses, crushed nearly flat by the relentless machinery of the yard. The iconic cherry red paint was now a scabbed-over nightmare of rust and primer. The beautiful chrome bumpers were twisted into grotesque modern art, and the windshield was a spiderweb of broken glass. The driver's side door, the one I had leaned against countless times, was folded in half like a piece of paper, and the interior was a soggy, ruined mess of shredded upholstery and exposed springs. This wasn't a car. This was a monument to disregard, a brutal visual representation of how little our history had meant to him in the end. I stood there for a long time, just staring, the cacophony of the scrapyard fading into a distant hum, as I absorbed the totality of the destruction, and in that moment, my mission transformed from a quest for retrieval into a crusade of resurrection. I turned to Ray and made my offer on the spot, not even bothering to haggle, naming a price that was 10 times what my uncle had sold it for, and I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He agreed, and the process of extracting the mangled hull from its metal tomb was a slow, painful birth, with chains and winches groaning in protest. Getting it onto the flatbed tow truck I'd hired was a logistical nightmare, a careful ballet of avoiding further damage to a vehicle that was already almost beyond repair. As I followed the truck away from that place of despair, watching the wreckage of my dreams sway precariously on the back, I felt a terrifying doubt creep in. What had I done? I had just invested a small fortune and every ounce of my emotional capital into a pile of scrap iron that would never drive again, all to spite a ghost. The project became my entire world, my obsession, my therapy, and my penance all in one. I rented a garage space that was larger than my apartment, and I filled it with the corpse of the Impala and every tool I could possibly need, creating a cathedral dedicated to a single seemingly impossible purpose. I started by carefully cataloging every single part, labeling and bagging anything salvageable, which amounted to shockingly little: a few interior knobs, a section of the grille, the steering wheel hub. The rest was a lost cause, and I began the arduous process of sourcing new old stock parts from specialized dealers, scouring online auctions, and traveling to swap meets across the state. Each acquisition a small victory in a long, expensive war. My social life evaporated, my savings account dwindled at an alarming rate, and my hands were permanently etched with grease and nicks from countless hours of painstaking labor. But I didn't care. Every turn of a wrench was a rebuttal to my uncle's final judgment. The restoration was a journey through our shared history in reverse. Each step reminded me of a lesson he had taught me in that very garage so many years before. I remembered his patient voice guiding me through rebuilding the engine, a 327 V8 that I now had to source a whole new block for, and I could almost feel his hand over mine as I carefully set the timing. I painstakingly hammered out the dents in the body panels he had once shown me how to repair, the rhythmic clang a bitter echo of those happier summers. Stripping away the layers of ruined paint felt like stripping away the layers of his betrayal, revealing the bare, honest metal beneath, ready for a new beginning that I would define. The car began to rise from its ashes, piece by agonizing piece, transforming from a crushed wreck into a rolling chassis, then a painted shell, and finally something that began to resemble the car I remembered. It was no longer his car. It was becoming mine, rebuilt not on his promise, but on my sheer stubborn will. The day the new paint was applied was a spiritual experience. I had chosen the exact same shade of cherry red, a color called tuxedo red, that GM had offered in '67, and watching the spray gun lay down that first glossy, wet coat was like watching a phoenix be reborn. The deep, mirror-like shine that emerged after days of wet sanding and polishing was a catharsis, erasing the visual memory of the rust and ruin from the scrapyard. When the pristine chrome bumpers and trim were finally bolted on, the car suddenly stopped being a project and became a masterpiece, a flawless, breathtaking recreation of its former glory, but somehow even better. I stood back, my arms crossed, and for the first time I saw not the ghost of my uncle's betrayal, but the physical manifestation of my own perseverance. I had done the impossible. I had taken his final act of disregard and alchemized it into a triumph.